Thank you. Welcome to this very special, distinguished seminar with Stéphane Bancel. Before I introduce Stéphane, I wanted to introduce our two colleagues who are going to be conducting this fireside chat with him this evening. On Stéphane's right is my colleague, Professor Agni Orphanodikaki. Agni is a fellow in management studies at Exeter College and a visiting scholar also at the Harvard Kennedy School as a Harvard Data Science Initiative Fellow. Agni's research agenda has primarily focused on developing new methods and models for healthcare practitioners using data-driven techniques. She's also studying the implications of these models on automated decision-making, setting the foundations of a novel field of algorithmic insurance. Prior to joining Oxford, Agni received a PhD in operations research from MIT, and she also gained industry experience working at McKinsey & Company and holds a BSc in Management Science and Technology from the Athens University of Economics and Business, Greece. Please join me in welcoming Agni. To Stéphane's left, we have Dr. Giles Davies. Giles is a breast cancer surgeon and director of surgery at the Cromwell Hospital, London, where he chairs the cancer board. He has 25 years of clinical experience as an NHS consultant in London and the Doctor of Medicine research degree from the Institute of Cancer Research. Since 2017, Giles has broadened his scope of interest in the business and innovation setting of a stem cell storage company, a holistic primary care center, and more recently, a healthcare consulting business, OX Square Healthcare Consulting. Giles is also one of our students currently enrolled in the Oxford Masters in Global Healthcare Leadership. Please join me in welcoming Giles. And finally, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Stéphane Bancel, who has served as Moderna's Chief Executive Officer since October 2011, as a member of Moderna's Board of Directors since March 2011. Before joining the company, Mr. Bancel served for 5 years as the Chief Executive Officer of the French diagnostics company bioMérieux. From July 2000 to March 2006, he served in various roles at Eli Lilly and Company, including as Managing Director, Belgium, and Executive Director for Global Manufacturing Strategy and Supply Chain. Mr. Bancel also serves on the Board of Directors of Generate Biomedicines and Indigo. He is currently a venture partner at Flagship Pioneering, and Mr. Bancel holds a Master of Engineering degree from École Centrale de Paris and a Master of Science in Chemical Engineering from University of Minnesota and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Well, no one is perfect, but having said this, I asked Stéphane what's the most exciting part of his role, because clearly Moderna is a company that has been in the news. We have probably used the product in the pandemic, and of course a big thank you to Moderna for all the lives that company has saved during the pandemic. So a big thank you to you for that. And Stéphane's answer was refreshingly very simple and humble. He said people. Essentially, the best part of the job really is meeting, interacting with bright people, both in Moderna, also in Cambridge, and of course in Oxford. So welcome once again to Oxford. We're very pleased to have you back here with us. Over to you. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to you all. Thank you, Stéphane, first of all, for coming. The event we held last year was really insightful with the CEO of Pfizer, and I know we're going to have a very rich and rewarding conversation tonight. Last week, the Nobel Prize was awarded again to researchers in the field of RNA medicine. And yet, if I took you back to 2010, there would have been a lot of skepticism about the future of RNA as a technology platform for healthcare. It's an unstable product. It causes inflammation. And I wondered, I suppose, to start off with, if we could take you through your journey, what made you jump from an established position into a startup? What challenges did you face in those early years where perhaps the evidence wasn't quite there? And then how did you capitalize on the opportunity around the time of the pandemic? And I suppose now the reflections, perhaps partly as an organization, but more as a leader, around what lessons you took from that pandemic and how that now informs your organizational strategy for Moderna now.
Right.
Does that sound like a good start?
Yes. So good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Dean, for the kind words. So one day in February of 2011, Noubar Afeyan, the CEO of Flagship, one of the best VC in life science in Boston, calls me and is like, "Where are you?" Because, I'm always traveling in the world, running a big public company. I said, "Actually, I'm in Boston." He's like, "Well, you have to come see me tonight." So I go to his office, and he showed me data in 10 mice showing that they've used mRNA to code for human EPO, injecting mice, and they tell me they see human EPO in the blood of mice, which, of course, they make mouse EPO. And I look at the data, and I'm like, this is impossible because of all the reasons you said. And he was very good, Noubar, because he didn't try to convince me. He asked me a question. And he's a very charming guy. He's like, you understand science really well. You're a good business guy. What if this is true? What if the data you're looking at are real? And I said, well, if this is true, we're going to be able to do medicines that nobody else can do with other existing technology, small molecule or protein. I told him because we're going to use the same chemistry for everything, if we can make one drug work, they're all going to be the same chemistry in the human body, so the probability of success of the drugs will be through the roof. As you know, I'm sure you did a lot of cases, in pharma, most drugs fail, never get to market. It's a pretty bad ROI business model. And I told him, by the way, if we invest in manufacturing process development, because it's always the same process, we're going to be able to go really fast. And then I paused. I'm like, you tell me if this is true, we're going to be able to do a lot of drugs that nobody else can do. Most of them are going to be working, and they're going to be very fast in the lab and very fast in the clinic. And he looks at me like, yep. And I'm like, what am I missing? Because it's so rare that in business you can do all those same things at the same time. And so he's like, look, we're going to build this company. You can be the CEO. You can be a board member. You can be an investor. You can be an advisor. You can be nothing. You decide. So I leave his office. I'm crossing the bridge back to Boston from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it's, it's snowing. My head is spinning. I must have looked like a drunk because I'm just going. I'm like, what am I missing? What am I missing? And so it's interesting because I initially thought this is crazy. And then I started to think about Noubar's question, what if we can make this work? And because it could clearly change medicine forever, I used the recombinant industry as a mental model, which was very helpful to me, which is if you think about Amgen and Genentech, those companies were started in the 70s. And look at what has happened in the last 50 years in terms of medical impact. It's just remarkable. But I cannot prove it, but I'm sure that if I could go in a time machine and meet the early team of 10 people starting Genentech and or Amgen and tell them, guys, keep working really, really hard. The thing you're working on is going to work. And one day you're going to have an antibody to PD-1, which is kind of immuno-oncology drug saving a lot of life. I'm sure they would have told me first, are you out of your mind? We cannot even make a human protein work on E. coli. How can we make an antibody? And then the second question I'm sure they will have told me is, by the way, Stéphane, what is PD-1? Because in the 70s, PD-1 was not even a thing. That gene did not exist. We did not understand it. And so I use that mental model to think about, geez, if you think about mRNA, not in the next few quarters or few months, but in the next few decades, we have no idea what we can do with this technology if we can make it work. So I say, look, if we make this work, the upside is a new toolbox in the hands of doctors to help a lot of people. If we fail, well, we're going to have to find new jobs. So like the upside-downside asymmetry was so big that it ended up being a very easy decision. I had great support from my wife, which thought I was a bit crazy, but super supportive. The most interesting was my friends, especially my business school friends. Because I called a few good friends saying, hey, should I do it or not? Everybody say, don't do it. There's not one of my friends or family member but my wife who said do it. It's like, you're running a public company, you're doing super well, what are you doing with your life? And it's this asymmetry of the impact I could have with my life on this planet to help other people. That was so exciting.
It's interesting you say your wife being your part of your decision-making process. I think that's often the case where an external, close family member gives you a sort of rational answer. You seem so excited about it. Try it, and try and do that. And it strikes me that you're somebody who's completely connected with patients, passionately, despite there being that sort of, if you like, geographical distance between you and a patient. You're not injecting the drug into those things. I just wonder where that comes from in terms of, because presumably your inspiration or being inspirational as a leader is partly stems from something that makes you tick. Yeah. It can't have just been the big commercial upside that came from it.
No, I think it goes back to, all of us have been impacted in our life by disease, I lost my super close grandma of breast cancer when I was 12 or 13. My grandpa of prostate cancer. Yeah. My mom is a breast cancer survivor. Now she has leukemia. My dad has prostate cancer. So, you can keep on going. And I know it's true for most of you guys. Yeah. And so what I love about what I do is that all my life I worked in life science, is with the time I have on this planet, I can use it like you do, even at a higher level than I do, because you literally touch patients every day, is helping people. And the mental model I have is, when we were working on the vaccine, but it's true for everything we do, is I use the people I know and I love, my family, my friends from college, from B school, people on my team, as my mental model, thinking about all the people in your lives. I don't know you, but I know you love your partners, your siblings, your parents. And I don't believe I love people that I'm dear to more than you love yours. I think that's a beautiful thing about us being humans, is we have this thing that's called love that's kind of quite unique if you think about the animal kingdom. And we can use that as a verb to do things. And for me, that's a mental model I have. And to give you an example, I was in our plant in Canada a few months ago, and one of the operator in manufacturing, literally somebody making the product in the clean rooms, she asked me, what advice would you have for me to stay very focused so I don't make mistakes? Yeah. And I asked her, and it was like a town hall with the whole plant, and I told her, do you celebrate Christmas? And she's like, yes, we celebrate Christmas. And I assume every year when you host for Christmas, you focus on the quality of a meal and the experience to your family the same way you did last year or even better. And she's like smiling, yes, I do. I care a lot because I want everybody to have a good time. Well, every time you make a batch, think about a different person you love. Because you're making a vaccine, it's going to be used in Canada. That batch you're making today is going to be used for somebody you are in school with. And the batch next week you make with, it might be your brother getting it. And the week after, it might be somebody else. And if you have that mental model and you care deeply because you think about somebody you love, then by extension, it's the rest of the planet.
Yeah. I think it's a very powerful statement, and that resonates, that connection between your sort of being a very authentic leader and presumably creating that culture within your organization where other people feel that they will come with you on that journey. So when did you first sense the opportunity becoming a reality commercially and in an innovation way? When did you first see the technology come to life within Moderna?
So it was by step, and because we did cutting-edge science that a lot of it had never happened in the world anywhere else. It was not a linear process, as a lot of scientists in the room know. It was 2 steps forward, a step backward, 2 steps forward, a step on the right, a step backward, 2 steps forward. There were some very exciting days and some very, very scary days. You can ask my wife, she will tell you in the first 2 years when Moderna was 20 people and most things were not working, I will come someday home and I will be so excited because something fundamentally important to the technology was working. And I was so excited about what it will mean for drugs that I will not sleep the whole night. I will be laying in bed and looking at the ceiling, and just all those things will go in. My heart will be racing. I will not sleep the whole night. And then I'll come back 2 weeks after, and something really important didn't work. Yeah. And it was the third time we were at it, and it still didn't work. And I'm like, we're going to go bankrupt. And my wife is a photographer, so she does not understand science or business. She's like, which one is it? And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, how can you not know you're the CEO? I'm like, I don't know, because this has never happened before. She thought I was going to become clinically bipolar because of her. So the good news is, because we had an amazing team and we are private, which is we had no scrutiny of the capital market that have no patience for innovation or science, we're able to, privately do our work. We'll always share, of course, everything with investors, the good and the bad and the ugly. But it allowed us to really focus on the science and nothing else. Yeah. And so we started to get some velocity point where, it starts, you have some cool data in mice that you can reproduce. You say, okay, that's cool. Yeah. And then you have your first monkeys, and oh, geez, this is working too. Yeah. And then you do the first clinical studies year 4 into the company. And everybody in the clinical study that we did in Germany had super high level of antibody in their blood. It was a vaccine for a pandemic strain of flu. And I went back to the board and I said, well, the first study is working, so now we need to build a plant. And again, this is Moderna, we're like literally 100 people. And I say, this is a $150 million plant. Maybe at the time we have $600 million in the bank, so it's a lot of capital. And I said to the board, either we can decide to do this plant in 5 minutes, or we can agonize on that decision for the next 6 months. You decide. But if a company we have been talking about the last 4 years, you really believe in, this ability to build a platform to do a lot of drugs in parallel, that company cannot happen without the plant I'm describing to you. So if we want to be honest to our strategy, we have to be courageous and build that plant. And it was a 5-minute discussion, and they let me go and run and build a new plant.
So you made what could have been a complicated decision very easy.
Correct.
And we were talking a little bit over tea about the operational scaling of a business, at scale, at speed, and at pace. And it'd be really interesting to hear how that happened on a practical level as the pandemic, for example, sort of kicked off. Or before.
Sure, and I think the media has done a pretty good job describing the clinical trials during the pandemic, because a lot of people were at home trying to figure out when are we going to get this out of this pandemic. But I think the media has done a good job, in my opinion, describing what happened on operations. Because while what happened clinically was amazing, I believe that what happened from a manufacturing standpoint was even more amazing. To give you a sense of how crazy this was, in 2019, for the entire year, across all of our products, we made less than 100,000 doses, way less than that. I'm just using it as a nice rounding number. It hit me late January 2020 that we're going to go into a pandemic like 1918 flu. Before that, for the month before, I thought it was going to be an outbreak like SARS or other outbreaks. But by the end of January, I was certain. I'd run the Excel model myself on my laptop with cases and so on, talking to a lot of amazing scientists around the world. I was certain it was going to be a pandemic. Yeah. And so I go up 2 floors to my head of manufacturing, Juan, that a lot of my colleagues here know very well. I go to Juan's office, my head of manufacturing, an amazing Spanish guy, and I close the door of his office. I'm like, it's going to be a pandemic. How do we make 1 billion doses next year? And he's sitting in his chair, and he looks at me. I'm still standing at his doorway. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, do you know we made only 100,000 doses? I said, you're wasting time. How do we make 1 billion doses next year? And Juan, to his credit, is an amazing leader. He took a deep breath. He looked at me. And he stood up, he went into the whiteboard in his office. He's like, I need clean rooms, I need machines, I need people, and I need raw materials. And we started listing the key ones, and literally he and I got our iPhone in our pockets. We started calling CEOs of companies because I told him, nobody has put in their budget a pandemic. So vials, machines, all those things, nobody has prepared for them. And so we started going to this race against time to just starting to get those components and starting to get the network together because we knew that we didn't have enough capacity of clean room at Moderna. And so we just had to call companies and figure out who had capacity right now. Like I would call some CEOs, do you have clean room available for rent? And somebody would start the response. Yeah, in 2 years. I'm like, thank you very much, ciao, bank. I call somebody else, wasting time. And so this was this, and the team did an amazing job. I mean, Nick was in the middle of it. He's sitting here very humbly. But I think just it's this incredible teamwork that has happened between the team at the company, the team at the suppliers. It was so personal for everybody.
Yes.
I've never lived through a war. I hope I will never live through a war, but we were at war against a virus.
Yes.
And the way I saw people behave is what I believe when you hear stories or you see movies about wartime, how teams and humans and people did extraordinary work, things that if you would ask them to do those things, they would never do it in normal times, but they will do them because it was be the right thing to do. Yes. It was a super humbling moment.
And that's that leading from the front, isn't it? And that, bringing people with you on the journey. And again, that resonates again with your attachment to people. Do you think, the pace of that, the intensity, the energy, it's died down. You're in a different phase of your organizational life cycle now as you broaden and diversify the potential avenues. Have you changed the way in which you strategize now based on what you kind of learned? Or this is possible, I pick up the phone, I can triple my capacity, so next time I need to do that, I'm just going to pick up the phone? Or is it something that was, we got over that, we just got through it, the energy in the room is now dying, we need to sort of restructure the way we do things? Is it business as usual, or is it a different...
So it's interesting. I was with a team at lunch, and you can ask them. I told them, we need to keep a mindset that every day matters.
Yeah.
Because we're working on cancer drugs, we're working on important vaccines, we're working on rare genetic disease medicines where the kids have no hope. There's nothing on the market available for them. It's terrible for the parents. So every day matters because, again, if you go back to my mental framework, which is those kids, their parents love them. Their grandparents love those kids. Cancer, it might be somebody in your family right now. I have a couple of very close friends of mine, my age, who have cancer right now. And so it's very, very personal. So we need to keep the mindset that every day matters. We need to be relentless and thinking, how do we solve problems? I think too often in organizations, there's this very kind of pyramid way of working, which is junior people talk to junior people in other companies and things take forever. Where if you have the culture, which I hope we have at Moderna, I'm trying to coach the team to have more and more of that culture.
Yes.
As you engage the leadership of other companies, like I've done recently on some of our cancer products with some of the manufacturers helping us to scale up manufacturing for individualized cancer, which I hope we can talk about in a minute, because that's amazing science, is once you get the leadership understanding what we are doing, they actually want to help us more. They want to remove barriers in their own company for us. And I think people, a lot of time in business, do not use that as a way to engage with partners, because it takes a village.
Yeah, and I think if you've in a way, in some contexts, you've got a narrow mission, but actually you've got a very wide lens at delivering it. Agni, we were talking a little bit about innovation in technology terms, and perhaps this is a good time to move into that in terms of the potential of Moderna's technology, and how the new era of big data, artificial intelligence, how you might leverage that for your organization.
Yeah, it's a particularly exciting week, I would say, for artificial intelligence. 2 Nobel Prizes given to them, and I guess one of them touches even more closely to the core values and mission of Moderna. And there's bigger discussion happening around Oxford on like how artificial intelligence is changing the way we are doing science, is like changing fundamentally even the way we are providing care as doctors. So we would be very interesting to hear your take. Like what is the future of drug development with AI, and what are the big opportunities but also the challenges that you see coming ahead?
Sure. So I think I'm kind of lucky because in my career, and I'm on the age myself, I've seen a few technology revolutions that have changed everything. And when they start, people are very skeptical. It's little pieces of places where it's starting to happen in terms of adoption, and then it goes and it changes everything. I was lucky enough to start working in the 90s where really the desktop and the laptop were starting to really be everywhere in a workplace. It's going to look funny to a lot of you that are younger. But in my first job when I went to work after grad school, my boss used to have his secretary print his email on paper. And he will read email on paper, like the snail mail, and then he will dictate to her, and she will take stenography, and she will go back to her computer and type in the reply of the email. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is crazy. This happened with older people in organization, and we should come back to it with AI in terms of change management. And then, of course, the internet. I go to business school. I graduated in 2000 when NASDAQ is in the sky. And I go to Eli Lilly, and the CEO of Lilly tell me, hey, if you join me and you join us, would you be OK to reverse mentor the executive on how to use the internet? I'm like, they don't know how to use the internet? The VP said, really? And so same theme. And then, of course, the mobile phone and the app and decentralization of data and a computer in our pockets. And then AI. So what is interesting is the first time I got shocked by AI personally at Moderna was in 2016, 17, because some of our teams using not large language model, but machine learning in science, invented new enzymes that don't exist in nature and started to show that they could engineer the enzyme to do what they wanted in manufacturing, because we use enzyme as a tool to make mRNA in the reactors. And some of the byproducts, like bad stuff that was made by the enzyme that we didn't want and that we had to purify, extract out of a reaction to get a clean product, was made by a natural enzyme. But you could evolve a natural enzyme to be better than nature. And I should precise than what nature has done so far. Because if you start to explore what nature could do in the future, because evolution applies with some rules, you could actually get ahead of things. And so the team worked on it. Of course, at the beginning, every scientist poo-pooed, where the machine can tell you better enzyme than nature. And somebody was crazy enough to use the data from a computer to go make the enzyme to try it and say, yeah, it was doing what the computer told us the enzyme was doing. And they repeated the work so much that we went back to the regulatory agencies to change the manufacturing process based on that. And that was a big aha moment for me. I'm like, oh, this is weird. This is big. And then we started to do an AI academy at Moderna because based on what I saw with my boss in the 90s with his email on paper and the Lilly thing with the internet with executives, I'm like, this technology, its bottleneck is going to be senior people in companies. Why? Because senior people are most of the time older than junior people, just how life works. Because as we get older, human as a species, Homo sapiens, we are less and less comfortable with change.
Yeah.
It's just part of most people, not everybody, but most humans, as they age, they get less and less comfortable with change. And so I'm like, the biggest constraint of us adopting AI, and it's pre-GPT. So we set up an AI academy to start to train every employee on AI, machine learning, and so on. And then, of course, ChatGPT happened, and I played with it the whole Christmas. I think it was 2023, if I remember correctly. I spent the whole Christmas playing with it, and I'm like, geez, this is crazy. And again, as an engineer and as somebody who believes in smart engineers, scientists, and compounding, you don't have to be very, very smart to say, geez, this thing, in a couple of years, is going to be really cool, and in 5 years, it's going to be amazing and very, very different. And so reached out to OpenAI CEO, and said, hey, we need to do something big together. And so we decided to partner with two companies. And so we use AI we try to use AI in everything we do now. There's not a day that goes by where I don't use GPTs. We have a GPT enterprise, so I can train the system to know who I am, so the system knows I'm a CEO of Moderna, I'm an 8 Enneagram style, the way I like my answers, my education. He knows everything about me. So he just customized the answers. And so we're trying to use it a lot across drug development. Because if you think about drug development, it is only about data. A clinical trial is, you have a scientific hypothesis, you write a protocol, you go run a clinical, and you get the data. Based on the data, you decide the dose of a drug. You look at the safety of the efficacy. You compare it to other drugs. What do you do to the regulator? You send them data. It used to be in a big truck in the olden days. Now it's digital. But you just send data to the MHRA or the FDA. You just send nothing else. If you think about a commercial team, pricing decisions, commercial, I mean, it's all data.
Insights, everything.
What we do as a company, as a management, I mean, I'm not in the lab. I'm not in a factory.
Yeah.
I spend my life looking at data.
Yeah, you're consuming information.
Yeah, I'm consuming information. So if I can have a system helping me, and same for the rest of my organization, look at a large set of data in a way that my brain cannot process. I mean, think about a scientist. We are, I think, at around the 4,000th experiment since we had the company. With so many iterations of a science, and the nucleotide, the lipid, the chemistry, the manufacturing process. There's so many variables the team played with in so many different species of mice and rats and monkeys and humans. Even Stephen, who is the head of R&D since the beginning, who is an amazing human being, he doesn't have everything in his brain.
Yeah.
So how do you start to look across time at an extremely large set of data to try to get assumption, hypothesis that can help iterate where you go next?
Yeah. It was one of the first things we sort of learned was management is dealing with complexity, but leadership is about change, and about change. I wanted to move on just to talking, when we talk about the modern era and complex solutions to complex problems, we have a lot of discussions within our class about equity and access. And I wanted to explore a little bit about how Moderna is addressing, not just from a sustainability point of view per se, but how Moderna's envisaging giving its innovations and products to the world, and how you're making efforts to do that.
Sure. So a few different ways, because I don't believe in silver bullets. They rarely exist.
Yeah.
One is, and actually we have a few scientists here from Oxford that are partners with us, is we launched a program a few years ago called Moderna Access. It's basically, like an app store-like solution where a scientist from Oxford can literally design an mRNA vaccine based on the virus that he or she has studied for his or her life. And that idea came to me year one of Moderna, which is, look, we have all this amazing scientific knowledge around the world. How do we tap into it so we serve patients faster? Because except if you're arrogant and naive, believing that we can replicate some of that scientific knowledge quickly and easily is just not true. But if what you could give a scientist who has spent, a life on West Nile virus or Ebola here or in Africa, and we have, for example, some partners, in Algeria or in Japan or anywhere, who is able to get and design in silico a vaccine that weeks after they can get in a FedEx and try in their petri dish or in the animal model where they have all the assay and everything. That's the medicine of the future. That's medicine where you put patient first and you care about the outcome, not how you get there and who gets there and who gets the credit, but about the patient outcome. So that's one example. Another example is partnering with countries to get access to products, which we did a lot during the pandemic. I wish we could have done more. The pandemic was very complicated. I'm happy to go there if you want, because politically it was not easy. And when you saw countries not sharing vaccine or ventilators, even within Europe, if you remember, some countries not shipping ventilators from one country to another one in a region where there is no frontiers. That was quite interesting to see. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. The other piece is rare disease and ultra-rare disease. As a company, we are very committed to rare disease and ultra-rare disease. And ultra-rare disease, sometimes you have 20 kids in the world. So there is no business model for...
No, the market doesn't work.
It doesn't work. So how do you invent that world, which you can with a platform? In traditional big pharma, we need a factory for every drug. You cannot even think about doing that. But in a world where your molecule is an information molecule, when it's the 4 letters that you just put in the different orders, as you all learned crash course in biology during the pandemic about mRNA, you can do that. We're doing it right now in cancer. We're doing individualized product where if you and I get diagnosed with melanoma by the same doctor in your hospital, Moderna will make a different chemical drug for you and for me in 30 days. That's where medicine is going, and we need to find a way to make sure people have access. But it's already a big issue. I mean, if you think about it, just in Boston where I live, between the richest zip code of Boston downtown and the poorest zip code of Boston, there's 10 years of life expectancy difference. 10 years today in kind of one of the mecca of biotech in the world. It's crazy. And so we have to work industry, governments as a huge role to play, not-for-profit hospitals have a huge role to play. I think one of the things we have to deal with as a society, and earlier today I was in London talking to several government officials, is we really need to do a pivot from sick care to healthcare. We are at an amazing time in the history of humanity, which is we have never known so much about human biology, about medicine. And I think the next 5-10 years are going to be totally head spinning because of the way which innovation is going, big data, robotics, AI, it's all helping accelerate cost of sequencing dropping and so on. We really need to move our healthcare system from sick care to true healthcare, where it's all about nutrition, exercise, sleep, vaccines, things that prevent you from being sick. We should have a healthcare system massively incentivized to help you not get sick, to see pre-disease condition when diseases are starting at the molecular level in your body before they become a health issue, because you could reverse a lot of those with the right intervention for pretty cheap. And I think with aging population, which is a big issue, and this one you're not going to change in the Western world, it's a totally time bomb from a budget standpoint. Total time bomb.
Yes, sorry.
Please.
I'm just cautious of time, and I know that the audience is like very eager probably to ask questions. We've been getting some questions online as well, so I'm just going to start with our online audience, and it actually touches upon what you were mentioning about making speeding up the clinical trial process, making it more accessible to minorities across the world. How do you think is that going to change? Because on the one hand, you have like the drug developers like Moderna, but on the other hand, you have regulators. And if change is difficult within Moderna, I can assume that it's only a little bit, if not more difficult in the regulator side.
Yes, so let's put the problem in pieces. So on the diversity side of the house, I think there's been a lot of progress. There's still a lot to do. We are, as a company, extremely committed to diversity in clinical trial. Most people don't realize, but we slowed down the Moderna phase 3 study during the COVID pandemic, which was one of the hardest decisions in my life because we're fighting a virus and people were dying literally. We most probably slowed down the study by 2 to 3 weeks to approval date. Because towards the end of August, early September, we had mostly white male, to speak in plain English. And we looked at the data with the team and said, this cannot be. We cannot have worked so hard with so many people suffering and people with different skin colors, female, people from different geography in the world, not knowing or believing that the vaccine was going to work and be safe for them. And so after a couple of days of extremely painful discussions, we decided to close clinical trial sites where they had already enrolled too many white male. And we put a lot of effort and emphasis helping the sites that have done a very good job recruiting diversity and diverse population. And now what we do as a company, which I think is a first in the industry, before we start a phase 3 study, we communicate publicly about our diversity target for that study. We say before we start enrolling the first patients, for all the different subpopulations that are really important to understand, we communicate our target publicly before we start to kind of hold ourselves accountable within ourselves as a team and to the public. That's what we need to do because that's what's important to do for society.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to ask our participants now to raise their hands if you have any questions. Maybe we can start over there, take 2 more, and then we can answer them.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. My name is Tia, and I'm from Indonesia. I'm studying MBA. So I have one statement and one question for you. So I'm the founder of Oabl. It is an Indonesia-based community support platform, and we support rare disease patients and special needs children in my country. My first statement is that if you need to collaborate involving special pediatric patients, and to be specific, 200 children with neurological and respiratory problems, including other abnormalities or rare disease conditions in my country, feel free to reach me, because we actively look for researchers who want to help these children live healthier and longer. Wonderful. And the second question, and the second thing is that it's a question, if you can name 3 critical points that you deliver to convince investors to invest in your innovations, such as mRNA vaccine, where back then we know the outcome is quite unpredictable and the failure rate is also high in the biopharma sectors. Can you name those 3 critical points that you use to convince the investors? Thank you.
Sure. I think the one of the things that is the least understood in the investment community, to your question about our company, is the platform nature of what we do. Because there's no big platform in our industries before. Because if you think about the pharma industry for the last 120 years, since we're aspirin and so on, it's, in my book, an analog industry, where every molecule is different, where you have to relearn everything from scratch in animal, in human. You need to build a different manufacturing process for every product. It's a very painful, very risky business, because every time you put a new chemical in a human, you have no idea what you're doing, and you're going step by step, and you're learning, and you're going to see toxicity you didn't see in animal, because the human body, there's still most of it we don't understand. And that drives a huge difference in probability of success of a drug. We had our recent annual R&D day, and we shared updated data of our success rate compared to industry average. So as you know, in the pharma industry, you do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And what we shared is if you combine the probability of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 working, it's still a small n of 40 drugs. It's not 1 or 2, but 40 is not thousands like the industry database. But if you look at our current track record from a phase 1 start to a phase 3 positive data, we are 6 times higher than industry. So again, the naysayer will tell you, well, Stéphane, it's only 40 drugs. You only have maybe 5 or 6 phase 3 positive. It doesn't really work. But if you go back again to the basic science and biology, that's really the power of what we do. Again, we're going to have to prove it over time, which is fair game. But I think that's one of the feature of our company that's quite unique. And then the second one is how we industrialize the company across research, clinical trial, manufacturing, to be able to really leverage this platform, because the science at its core, because mRNA is an information molecule, our science is suited for a platform. But in my experience, because the chemistry of small molecule or large chemistry is not platform-based, they have not built those companies as platforms. So how can you take the learnings from the tech world, where there's a lot of platforms, and bring it to our world to think about and to push the team to think about how would you structure, how would you make technology choices on your digital tools, on your AI tools, on your robotics tools, if you're not going to do one, but if you're going to do thousands. So if you look at it, we use that. I think the best example is in our US plant, where we make all the product for the preclinical work. We make thousands of mRNA a month, thousands. And we've industrialized this, robotized this, with this notion that it needs to be at a stage where it's very reproducible in terms of quality, it's very quick to get the product. And if a scientist, let's say in Oxford, has 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 hypotheses after a vaccine for one disease, they can do all 10 at the same time. Because the best way to advance the science so you get it faster to patient is you test your hypothesis in parallel in preclinical models. So you can take the very best drug that come out of scientists' imagination and intuition and hard work to take that very best drugs to human. In older technology, because the time and the cost of developing a different molecule is so expensive, they don't think that way. But I told all our scientists, I say, think that mRNA preclinical is free. It's not free, but think about it, it's free, because once we go into the clinic, we're going to spend $500 million to $1 billion in clinical study. We better have the best drug we can. So if it's $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 in the clinic, it's free compared to $1 billion. And so those are the type of things that I think a lot of people, because our platform is so new, do not yet appreciate in terms of what it means, in terms of where we are going, not where we have been.
And in a way, Stéphane, thinking of innovation as something that's novel, valuable, but also executable, it's that executable aspect of it that means you can deliver that. And that's often where innovations fail, isn't it? At that sort of implementation phase.
Yes.
And you've got the ability to do that.
Yeah, so I'm going to continue with a question from our audience.
Yes.
So it's more in the business school theme. So that amazing future can't be realized without managing cash. And so how are you driving productivity and ensuring efficiency for every dollar spent?
Yes, so we are obsessed about cash-on-cash return. So this is a different company than some public companies where there's this obsession about EPS, next quarter EPS. I am not obsessed about next quarter EPS. I've never been, and I think I will never be. Of course, we report EPS, we do all the accounting and so on. It is just that in this industry, because you have very long lead time, I don't know how to manage the value creation process by managing quarterly EPS. What we're obsessed about, and we have since day one of a company, is thinking about, on a risk-adjusted basis, if we put $1 or $10 million or $1 billion, how much can we get back to reinvest into the system to create more value? And so, as we think about assets, I mean, we described one recently at our R&D day a few weeks ago. We just started, I think starting soon in the UK, a norovirus phase 3 vaccine. There is no norovirus vaccine on the market by any company. And we have very exciting data. And so the way we made the business decision is we said, we have a phase 2 asset, it looks really good, it's worth maybe $500 million, pick a number, maybe $500 million, the value of the asset today, if we were to go to market and try to sell it to a big pharma company. We can invest $600 million of our cash, we have $11 billion on the balance sheet now, they're in T-bills, so we're earning nothing, I mean 4%, and as I tell investors, you expect me to get more return than 4%, or you will put the cash in T-bills, not in the stock. And so, we think about, we can invest $500 to $600 million in the phase 3 study in a 2-year time frame between the 1 year to run the study, then preparing the filing to regulators. In a 2-year time frame, you could have an approved product. The present value of that approved product at launch is $5 to $10 billion. If you do the math, depending on your high case, low case on sales, pick the midpoint if you want. So you can transform by obsessing about cash-on-cash return. $500 million asset with another $500 million of cash into a $5 to $10 billion asset in 2 years. That's pretty good returns. And that's how we've always thought about investing shareholders' capital and how do we prioritize projects. Because the good thing about humans is my team has many more projects than we can fund. And so the question we always goes around saying, okay, what's the return on your idea? And then handicap that for risk, because some people can have maybe very interesting returns, but it might be 10 years from now with 2% chance of success. So you have to handicap that versus somebody else who has a project where they might only get 2x the money, but it's this year. I mean, last week I was with our US commercial team, and as you know, we're into the COVID season right now with the new updated booster. And they came with a marketing project. They said, look, the ROI is 8x. In season. So it's like less than 3 months, 8x. I'm like, how much more money do you need? Because you don't have to be a genius in business. If somebody can give you 8x return that they kind of showed us for the investment they made before, they could get us an 8x return in the season. The only question as a boss is how much money do you need? So that's how I think we try to prioritize things across the board. Because it's ROI, it's a very it's an equalizer across everything you do. Because that's a challenge for me as a company at this size. Is I have manufacturing ideas, I have commercial ideas, I have research ideas, I have clinical trial ideas, I have academic partners ideas. And how do you find a common denominator, try to find a fair way for patients to figure out how you can do that? Because the returns you will create, then you can invest back into research and getting more medicine.
Yeah. And open sourcing your technology is a way of redressing that financial imbalance, if you like, on the sort of capitalist nature of the organization by open sourcing the technology for enhanced access elsewhere.
Yeah, and again, I think CEOs in our industry needs to think about the public health side of things, because at the end of the day, we're making medicine.
Yeah.
Look, we could move so fast with COVID because we had worked on the MERS vaccine. And most people didn't know what the MERS virus was before COVID happened, but we were working on it with academic partners and government partners. And so, as pastors used to say, the prepared minds. And I think part of Moderna's success has been to be the prepared minds and to be ready to run, because you have been thinking about similar problems.
Excellent. Any other questions from the audience? Maybe. Yes, over here, and then at the back. Will we take 2 questions, and then...
Thanks very much for the insightful talk. My name is Utkarsh. I'm a PhD candidate here. I was wondering, what were some of the lessons that you've learned working with the regulators? On one hand, we hear of regulatory capture, where there's too much regulation on things that perhaps are still in the flux, and then the risk of throttling innovation. But there's also a legitimate case that they make. So I was wondering what your perspective was.
Sure. So it's a good question. I was going to almost say, how long do you have? So if you think about it, the regulators, they have this tough balance to manage, which is they want the medicine to get to patients, but they have an extremely high obligation of safety to the public. And by definition, they're going to have to make decisions with incomplete information. And the best example is, you see it sometime, it happened, unfortunately, a few years ago with a dengue vaccine launched by a big vaccine company in Asia that ended up being a big public health disaster, because there was some safety signal once you were in the market at large scale that they saw that was not clear before, even to the company or to the regulators. And so it's always this trade-off, which is, when you have a good story of a good technology that was accelerated, everybody says it's great for patients. But when you have a bad story that happens, everybody is really, really upset with the government, with the regulators, as they should be. And so the piece is making decisions with totally incomplete information is, of course, really, really hard. And it's this tension between the upside and the downside. For example, right now, in one of our cancer products, we are trying to have a regulator agree with us that these products need an accelerated approval, because there is no downside on safety, which is extraordinarily rare in oncology. Yeah. It's the same safety than what they're going to get anyway. So we combine it with what the patients are going to get anyway. But the upside on efficacy is 2 out of 3 people, 3 years out after the surgery, have no disease or no distant metastasis, which of course is a big leading indicator of severe disease in cancer. And so because of this asymmetry, we're trying to convince the regulators, but because it's a new approach, there's a lot of questions being asked, because from a regulatory standpoint, it's really hard. I mean, if you think about the teams working in the regulatory agencies around the world, if things go well, nobody gives them credit. If things go wrong, the media, the government is all after them. I mean, in the US, I know the FDA, they're super worried. If something goes wrong, they're calling to Congress to go explain why they did that because somebody got hurt. But when the risk-reward, they had a good analysis with incomplete data they had, nobody thanks them. So it's a bit of a thankless job. And so our role as industry is to educate, build trust. When we know something, we say we know and we explain. When we don't know, I will tell the team we need to be very transparent and very clear. We don't know, because it's about trust. What the pandemic has been good to Moderna across the world is because of this extraordinary wartime effort and collaboration. Is in the normal times, you talk to regulators in a very structured process. Like in the US, you have to send a letter asking a question. They have 60 days to give you a reply. The reply might be, let's have a meeting in 2 months. It's like hell, right? And it's hell first for patients waiting for the drugs. But during the pandemic, it was literally send an email, we need to meet. Okay, what time? And they will meet on the same day. And they say, okay, we need to look at the data. We need to think about it with the team. We do another Zoom in 2 hours. And then they will ping us. 2 hours after, there'll be another Zoom. There'll be 3 meetings in a day. That whole process in normal time, not wartime, will be a 6-month process. Yeah. But what is remarkable for us in terms of this new technology is we had a lot of opportunity to educate scientifically the regulators and to build trust, because again, it was a lot of things was new to us too. And so that's why I kept always the team saying, hey, if we don't know, we need to be very clear, we don't know. You can share your hypothesis, you can share what you believe, but let's be very clear between what we know what we believe, what we don't know, so we don't mislead the regulators, so we can build the trust. Because at the end of the day, it's always about people.
Yep. You come back to that.
It's human beings on the other side who are trying to do a good job. I don't believe that anybody working on the regulators who wakes up in the morning and say, oh, I'm just going to refuse that drug because it's going to feel good.
Yep. No. Should we have one final question?
Maybe one final question at the back.
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Bana. I'm doing my PhD in genomic medicine here, focusing on COVID vaccines. And the evidence is showing us that the future of drug development is genomics and is pharmacogenomics. And with the individuals, every person's genetic makeup influencing how they're reacting to drugs. And coming from personally a population, I'm Arab, I'm underrepresented in medical research in general. My question to you is, what do you think the future is going to look like in terms of this personalized genomics and personalized vaccinology approach? Is it too technical and too costly to create a vaccine that is tailored specifically for every individual's genetic makeup? Or is the solution going to be something like every population is going to have a different vaccine that is population specific, although that is also heterogeneous as well? So where do you see the future going, given all of these caveats?
So for the non-scientists in the room, I think it's going to be a mix of all those tools. So if you think about our world, we're going to have products that we all get the same product. And I think a respiratory vaccine like COVID or flu is a good example. You're going to have a world on the extreme opposite of an individual cancer treatment, where because of a consequence is dying, you're going to be able to individualize a product where everybody gets a different one. And then you're going to have products that are personalized in the sense that they are based on a biomarker I have, whether it's a genetic biomarker, whether it's a protein biomarker, or a different time in my life. For example, we're working a lot on latent virus at Moderna. I'm EBV positive. I had mononucleosis as a teenager. Yeah. One of the things I check with my dog, because I have a good dog, and I know science too much, I drive my dog crazy, is I check my viral load on EBV at least once a year. Because when I have a high viral load of EBV, I get him to put me on antiviral. Because I know, because again, I know a bit too much about the science, that over my lifetime, getting a high viral load of EBV is not going to be good for me. A lot of downstream, bad things happen, including a lot of cancers, a lot of, immune exhaustion and so on. So I think that's the world in which we're going into. If I play the movie a bit forward, and I'm a bit crazy, but I believe we're going to get to a world pretty soon where most of us are going to get a silico, representation of our body, because at the end of the day, it's a finite scientific problem. It's a very, 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 very complex scientific problem. But as we understand more and more about the human body in the years to come, you're going to be able to model more and more things. And I think our understanding mechanistically of what happens in very, very complex systems, which is why I think a lot of AI is going to be very interesting, because as we're talking before this talk with the small groups, if you think about some disease like Alzheimer, we start to have now both from, there's a genetic component, there's more and more physics about the role of inflammation. Yeah. There's some viral component, like a virus like HSV and other virus. So as we're going to get able to look at a lot of big data across large population, combine this with what's the genetic, what's the proteomic profile of patients, and so on at very large scale, we're going to start to better understand causations and correlations. And that's why I think we're going to really get some extremely interesting treatments happening. It could be diagnostic. I'm very excited about liquid biopsy. I think liquid biopsy is going to transform oncology in a very profound way. That's my personal belief. And so I think it's a lot of different technologies and being able to understand problems. If you think about medicine, where we are today in medicine compared to 200 years ago is unbelievable. But if you think about it, a few centuries ago, they used to literally bleed people to try to get them in a better health, which is kind of crazy to think about now. But they already believed, with good intent for a lot of those people, this was the right thing to do. But once we start to understand mechanistically what happens, then we as humans and scientists come with a lot of ideas how to go fix a problem.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to be living in a world extremely rich in data. And I think one of the biggest issues we have, going back to the healthcare seeker issue we have and transition we need to make as a society, is most people, including potentially in this room, know more about how their iPhone works and how their body works. And that's pretty scary. Because you can walk in Apple Store, I assume there's one in Oxford, and for $1,000, you can buy another iPhone. When for $1,000, you cannot buy another body, trust me. And it's kind of crazy because a lot of people are scared of biology. They did biology in high school, they never did biology again. But I think that as a society, we have an obligation to start to being curious and wanting to know about our health, to have the right tools, the right AI. I can think about a lot of bots coming, and already I know a lot of people are using GPTs as the doctor at home, sometimes in a scary way. But that's the world in which we are going, which is an amazing advancement in science across the board and medical knowledge, ability to make medical intervention, and this ability to have the community, you guys, everybody, owns your health because you deserve to be in a good health for a long time.
Thank you, Stéphane. I think there was, it's a nice place to wrap up. I wanted to ask you one final question, which was a more sort of a personal one. With organizational leadership at scale, you face intense pressures. I was just listening to your work schedule, and I've worked out we're exactly the same age. And I wanted to ask you sort of, how does a 36-year-old chief executive relax at the weekends, and how do you manage that work-life balance?
Yeah, so my life is not balanced. But what I've worked over the years, and I always tell internally to our teams, don't talk to me about work-life balance. It does not exist. If you're trying to save the world and save people, and every day matters, and every hour matters, work-life balance. What needs to exist, because if not, it's unsustainable, is work-life harmony.
Yes.
And so over the years, I had to develop a lot of things that work for me. Like, I know I have to do sports. It's very important to manage my stress. And because I'm an early bird biologically, I go run now at 4 o'clock in the morning. Why? Because when we're the kids at home, now they're in college, my wife and I talked about it. I said, I want to be at dinner with the kids. And so I always made it a point to flex early in the morning. My assistant knows that except there is a tsunami around 6, I leave the office. But at 4 o'clock, I'm doing emails in the morning. Sometimes to the pleasure of some other people. And so it's how do you develop a system that works for you? How do you work with your team? Like when I go away on vacation, like a Christmas break or whatever, my team knows I delete my email app from my phone physically. And my team knows if there's a fire, you call me, I will have my phone. If you need an answer within an hour, you text me, my phone will be around.
Can you speak to my wife?
I can speak to your wife. And so I think it's how do you set up those things to keep sanity? Like I go run in the morning, I don't take a phone, I don't take music, even though I love music. Because it's like 1 hour per day where I can think.
Makes sense.
I have no distraction, nobody's walking in my office, nobody's calling me or texting me. Nobody needs me, I'm by myself.
That's great.
And I just think. And so I think for me is how do you set up a life that works for you so that you can have this harmony.
Playing the long game, I think that's important. I've learned that as a surgeon as well. So look, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Particularly thank you, Stéphane, for being so detailed, passionate. Your passion, your ability to transfer knowledge, and the way you've described the unique nature of Moderna, I think is really inspirational. And I think it's been, I hope everyone would agree, it's been incredibly valuable leadership insights as well as much as anything else. So on that note, I'll hand back to Professor to wrap up things.
Well, I'm sure you enjoyed the session immensely. You took probably your nuggets of wisdom and insights. And Stéphane, I must say that you certainly shared so many valuable insights of the future of medicine. And I was very inspired that you and the team from Moderna who's here, welcome to, a special welcome to all of you too. You're really doing some very important things for humanity. So we wish you the very best, and thank you, and wish you the very best as you carry on your various pursuits. And I certainly took for myself, many things, but I remember work-life harmony. I think that's a very nice phrase. I also remember that people know more about the iPhone than their body. And if you allow me, I'll quote you on that at some point. But we have a small little gift for you. I know you live in Boston, which has Cambridge, which has a number of other schools, and you come from one of them. but I thought you might want to
Yes.
use this sometime.
Thank you. Let's look inside. Cool. T-shirt inside. Thank you.
So thank you very much once again. Thank you to Agni. Thank you to Giles. Please join me once again. Give a warm round of applause.